Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today we have Derek Pendlebury, Global VP of Sales and Marketing at Bellco Glass. He has spent over 40 years in the life science world, from helping make COVID-19 vaccines to supplying glassware and equipment to top pharmaceutical companies. Outside of the work, Derek is a farmer, motorcycle lover, and aviation history fan, with a family connection to India through his father's World War II service. We'll hear both the story of Velco Glass and Derek's own incredible journey. Welcome to the show, Derek.
Thank you, Arjun. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so could you just tell us the story of Belco Glass? What exactly is Belco and what are your products? What do you do at Belco?
So Bellco Glass is a glass and scientific glassware and instrument manufacturer based in New Jersey. The company's been in existence almost 90 years. Was founded in 1936. Originally making glass lampshades that were bell-shaped, hence the name of the company was Bell Company or Bell Corporation. That's how it started. In the mid-1950s, the company started manufacturing high-quality, high-purity glassware for scientific research and development purposes, for laboratories, and for small-scale pharmaceutical manufacturing. Moved into also manufacturing the equipment and instrumentation that was required to support that glassware. And that move happened in the early 1960s, about 1962. And since then, the company has built a reputation as being one of the highest quality glassware manufacturers in the United States. And we make a range of products that cover all types of liquid handling, research and development, small scale production and mid-scale production range, up to and including vessels up to 150 liters. We can theoretically go higher than that, but we have not been asked to yet by our customers. The types of products we manufacture are basic laboratory products, so test tubes, beakers, bottles, burettes, boiling flasks, all that kind of typical glassware that you'll see in any life sciences or chemistry laboratory. But then we also have a very heavy focus into cell culture. So we make tea flasks, we make spinner flasks, we make bioreactors, and we make bioreactors up to 150 liters in size. These are all glass, the product contact surface. Of the glass, everything we manufacture is what is called Type 1 Class A borosilicate glass, which is the only type that's approved by the regulatory authorities for product contact surface with therapeutic drugs. And everything we do is made from that type of glass. As well as the glassware, we make all the instrumentation that supports that glassware. So for the bioreactors, for example, that also includes all the control software for the bioreactor, the control towers for adding media, taking on gas, off gassing from the bioreactor, plus the control system that runs all of that process. And then we also make a lot of other types of instrumentation. For example, incubators and roller apparatus, in which companies use roller bottles in those systems for manufacturing adherent or suspension cell cultures. A lot of vaccines are manufactured using that process, and Bellco has a very strong quality reputation within companies that use roller bottles for vaccine manufacturing. So that's a small snapshot of what I would say, almost 4,000 products that we manufacture. I say heavy focus on cell culture and growing and developing cell culture systems. And we're also looking at exploring how we can take that knowledge, expertise, and apply it into the cell and the gene therapy markets as well. So, in a nutshell, in a few minutes, that sums up 89 years of history.
Yes, that is really interesting. And talking about your experience over 40 years, how did it all start?
So my background in life sciences goes all the way back to when I was a little kid growing up in North Derbyshire in the UK. And there was a TV program on at the time, and it was Adventures of Hans and Lottie Haas. And Hans and Lottie Haas were a German underwater photography couple. They made underwater films. They were both marine biologists, but they did a lot of underwater photography. And I was just as a kid, my mother would tell you, if she was still alive, that is, but she would have told you that I just sat there in front of the TV and I was absolutely fascinated by what I was seeing on TV. So I made my mind up at that point that I wanted to be some kind of a scientist. I didn't know what, because I was probably 5 or 6 years old at the time, but I wanted to do something in science. So that's where it all started, thanks to a German underwater photography couple. I then did pretty well at school in biological sciences. I went to college. I went to university at what was then Lanchester Polytechnic. Did a undergraduate degree in biological sciences, followed by a master's and then a PhD in marine biology. And then it was while I was doing that, I realized very early in my marine biology career that marine biology was a great way of getting a suntan, but a lousy way of making any money, because typically you're underpaid and you're working on grants and all that kind of stuff. So I wrote my PhD while I was working at the University of London. And and then I had one of those moments in somebody's life where you think everything's going to, you're looking at a change. And I had this discussion with myself in front of the mirror one morning when I was getting a shave before I went to work was, did I still want to be working at the university when I was 65 years old? And the answer was no. And I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. And it was through talking with some of the sales team that would come in and see me and see us and would sell systems to us as a university department that I decided to explore a career in sales. And I did that. I was lucky enough to be hired by Sartorius UK in 1986 as the sales rep for London. So I was still focused on small scale development work, but also London at that time was the home of several large breweries, several large pharmaceutical companies, gin distilleries, etc. So it gave me a very broad spectrum of background and knowledge in what was then the filtration business for purification, sterile filtration, etc. But it also involved working in areas like electrophoresis, Western Southern blotting for doing protein and DNA transfers, and a whole host of other areas as well as just sterile filtration. And on the basis of that, I then worked with Sartorius. I did some work with them internally as product manager, a product specialist first, then product manager, and helped develop a product which eventually went to market as Sartabind, which was a membrane-based chromatography purification process. So where chromatography ligands are actually bound to a membrane, they operate much faster than a regular chromatography process does, 50 to 60 times faster. And I was involved in the development of that product, the testing of it. And when that product was commercialized, it was commercialized initially in the United States. And the head of the filtration group at the time in Germany asked me if I would be interested in being one of 3 people to help set that organization up in the United States. And so, my wife and I had a long conversation. We decided it was too good a career move not to take advantage of it. And we moved to the US in 1994 and have been here ever since. So I started with Sartorius, and then I was one of 3 owners of a company down in Florida that manufactured microbiology testing systems. I spent some time at Paul Corporation, some time at Agilent. I've done some consulting work for companies. I've also worked at 3M, started ATMI's single-use program in North America. There was already an operation in Europe, but there was nothing in the States. And I also spent almost 8 years at CPC, Calder Products Company, which is the company that manufactures a large percentage of the single-use connection technologies that are currently used in global biopharmaceutical manufacturing when it's done in single use. And I was the global head of sales for CPC. So it's been a very interesting journey. And here I am with Bellco Glass, having spent the last almost just over 39 years working in the single-use market. And now I'm on the other side of that fence selling reusable technologies. So it's kind of an interesting career shift. It's a lot of fun, trust me, but it's an interesting career shift.
Yes, this is really, really interesting. So this is amazing story. You also have worked with other companies who have developed COVID-19 vaccine. Can you just share a short
Sure.
story about that?
Yeah, absolutely. CPC, so go back to pre-COVID times and in 2019. And CPC was at that time one of the world's, and still is one of the world's largest suppliers of single-use connection technology. And what that means is it's they manufacture the connectors that are built into single-use manufacturing systems to allow a system built by, for example, Sartorius to connect to a system built by, for example, Cytiva or Thermo Fisher. And it's a uniform connection technology that all manufacturers can have access to. CPC sells to everybody, but that can be used to make the customer's life a lot easier. And so our business was growing reasonably well. And then COVID happened, and the virus started to appear. Initially, everybody was a little skeptical about how bad it was, and soon it became pretty quickly identified as a global pandemic. And at that point, I think a lot of the OEM manufacturers, the companies that we sold our technology to, who built the single-use systems, nobody was really prepared for what was about to happen, and that was the explosion in demand for single-use technologies. Typically, it can take a decade or so for a new vaccine to be developed and approved by the regulatory authorities. Nobody was really prepared for the speed of approval that some of the COVID vaccines went through. And what happened was people were using single-use systems. They had CPC technology on. Nobody had the opportunity or time to revalidate additional technologies, additional systems. And so the demand curve for our technology went literally through the roof. There was a lot of discussion also earlier in the vaccine development program about doing all the initial testing in single-use systems at small scale and then transferring manufacturing to stainless steel systems at large scale. And the FDA, as an example of one of the regulatory authorities, was okay with that. Typically, the FDA would want to see a lot of parallel data to prove that the efficacy and the effectiveness of the vaccine hadn't been compromised by changing manufacturing processes or manufacturing protocols. But that was waived in this case because the urgency, global urgency for the vaccine was so great. But what happened was large companies like Pfizer, et cetera, who were manufacturing the BioNTech vaccine under license, stayed in single-use technology platforms for the entire manufacturing process. And for CPC, the impact there was tremendous because we, as a manufacturer, ended up being spec'd in on every single COVID vaccine manufacturing platform worldwide because we were already there at those companies. And basically, as I said earlier, nobody had the opportunity or time to do any other process development, and people just used what they had. So we had this crazy situation where, our demand for our products went up 200, 300, 400% almost overnight. And we were supplying everybody. It didn't matter whether it was Pfizer in Europe, Pfizer in the United States, whether it was GSK, whether it was Moderna, whether it was any of the like CanSino or any of the Chinese-based manufacturing companies, or whether it was Serum Institute in India, we were supplying products on a global basis. And the takeaway from that was that what COVID, I think, taught everybody, including taught CPC and all of our customers, was just how fragile the supply chain was, because it took one pandemic, which was dramatic, but one pandemic to completely turn the entire supply chain upside down. And I know a lot of companies were struggling. We were also struggling at some point because we didn't have the capacity to meet demand. But because our products were injection molded and we weren't having to install new casting lines to make membranes or anything like that, CPC was able to recover quite quickly from the COVID problem. We went through a period of many months where we were having to ration, if you like, or supply part of an order to this company, part to somebody else, so we could keep everybody in business and everybody producing until we built up our supply chain, built up our manufacturing expertise, our manufacturing capacity to meet the demand. And then, of course, as soon as that happened, the demand dropped off. So then a lot of companies were left with a lot of capacity and a much lower level of demand. But CPC, we did business with, through our OEM partners and through our distribution partners, we worked with every single COVID vaccine manufacturing company out there, whether it was directly through our team of technical support specialists who are in the field, or whether it was through our channel partners. We also work with the US government, with BARDA, and under Operation Warp Speed, we had many, many conversations with the team there in terms of supporting and supplying product and how we had regular meetings every couple of weeks with them over how we were developing our supply chain, our manufacturing base, etc., so we could keep everybody informed as to what we were investing and what the results of that investment was. So it was a very trying time. I used to have hair before COVID, but it taught us all a very salient lesson, and I think that was supply chain security is critical in this business.
That's a very important message. You need to have agile supply chain to address these kind of issues.
Correct.
And
And the one thing I will say as well, Arjun, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what it also taught us was you cannot have a robust supply chain at the expense of quality.
yeah,
For this industry, quality is paramount. And so everything has to be built around expanding production, but maintaining or enhancing quality. Quality can't come second best. It has to be the first thing on the agenda.
so talking about quality and production, how does Belco take care of these two things, and what is the unique thing? What is the USP for last 89 years, or what is the
So
legacy? I would.
yeah, we have a lot. So let me address the quality side of it first. So Bellco is an ISO 9001 registered company and has been for many, many years, well over 20 years. Because we are manufacturing glassware, and glassware by definition is either extruded or it's molded, but it involves a lot of processes that apply a lot of heat and generate a lot of particles. Scientific glassware is not manufactured inside of a clean space, clean room. So, a lot of my previous companies who worked in the single-use space, those plastic components were all manufactured inside of clean rooms, whether they were ISO 7, ISO 6, or ISO 5, or even some cases, if they weren't critical, ISO 8. But Bellco doesn't manufacture product in that type of environment. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one is manufacturing glassware is a process that produces more particulate material. So
Yeah.
maintaining ISO 7 standards while making glassware is almost going to be impossible. In fact, I would say it would be impossible. But secondly, unlike a plastic component, glassware can be very, very aggressively cleaned after manufacture. So we can do things with glassware like chromic acid washers, et cetera, to remove particulates, to remove contamination that you can't do the single-use assembly. And for a lot of instances, a lot of the products we manufacture, there's no requirement to produce them under sterile conditions. However, we do have the requirement in some instances to be able to supply sterile products. So if a glass system, for example, like a carboy or a reservoir bottle is used as part of a production process, we can and do manufacture those products. We clean them thoroughly. We then double package them and they go out for gamma irradiation. So we can supply them in that format if people want. So for us, having an ISO 9001 certification, that was our target. Now we're also working on other ISO certifications around green initiatives, et cetera, But manufacturing glassware requires a lot of energy input, so our carbon footprint is reasonable. That's how we manufacture. That's our quality standard. Every single product we manufacture at point of production and prior to packaging goes through a full visual inspection, whether it's before cleaning or afterwards. If we clean it, it's inspected pre and post cleaning and before packaging and before being packaged and sent to the customer. So we go through a lot of visual inspection. Any product that looks like it may have the slightest imperfection, whether it's a surface crack or a graze or a score mark or a chip or anything, is rejected. And at that point, that product is thrown away. We do not regrind glass and reuse it. So we don't do regrinds. So everything we manufacture is virgin product. So that's on the quality side. That's pretty much where we are and what we do. We also, from a manufacturing perspective, we do a lot of customization. So you ask, what is our core competency? We have two core competencies. One is glass systems manufacturing, Another one is equipment manufacturing to support those systems. Our core differentiator in both of those product ranges is our ability to, first of all, is our quality. We do not sacrifice quality at all in any shape or form. If you take any of our glass products and put them under electron microscope and compare them with some of the other lower cost manufacturers that we compete with, you'll see there's a big difference in quality and in terms of surface finish. And that surface finish equates to longevity. So our products last much longer than the competition, but they don't cost us less. They cost a little bit more, but they last 5, 10, 15, 20 times longer. The same is true for our instrumentation. I actually had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with one of our channel partners in Korea, and the lady who owns the company asked me a question and said she was actually at a Korean biotech company a few months before we spoke, and her comment was they told her that they were using Bellco bioreactors that they bought 25 years ago. Not bioreactors, sorry, incubators that they bought 25 years ago, and they had never broken down. They'd never had a failure. So she asked me jokingly if we could build in some obsolescence so she could sell some more. But that's, I think, one example of testimony to how solid and how strong our products are. So apart from the quality aspect, one of our other biggest differentiators in the marketplace is the fact that as a company, we can customize product. And we will do that. I don't know what the percentage customization is on our equipment, but on our glassware, it's in the 30% range. So 30% of what we sell is custom built for a customer. And that means doing different designs, et cetera, et cetera. So that customization sets Bellco apart from our competition, most of whom are financially bigger than we are, but the larger companies typically do not respond quickly to a customization request from an end user. We can do that, and we do that on a very regular basis. We had a customer here in North Carolina, that's where I live, in the States. A customer here in North Carolina who wanted a custom carboy with a series of spigots attached to it to be able to do XYZ, inlet and outlet connectors. They also wanted that carboy or those carboys to be safety coated, which is one of the other things we do. We put a safety coating on the outside of the glass that is designed to prevent glass shards from injuring operators if there's an accident or an issue. Anyway, these guys wanted that to be done. They gave us a drawing on the back of a napkin, literally on the back of an envelope, actually, and we turned it into a technical drawing within 24 hours. We sent it back to the customer. They looked at it again, looked at the dimensions, made some suggested modifications, sent it back to us. We sent a revised technical drawing back to them 2 days later, got the approval from them. They signed off on it. They issued the purchase order for those products about a week later. It took a week to go through their procurement system, the 4 signatures that they needed. And then they placed the order with Bellco, and we shipped the first 60 of those items to them 3 weeks ago. So that whole process took in total for 150 custom products, 60 delivered now, and the remaining 90 to be delivered at the end of this month, early September. That whole process took 4 weeks.
Amazing.
Some of our competition, and I'm not going to say who, but some of our competition will not even send the customer an order acknowledgement in 4 weeks. We were able to develop, draw, sign off, and manufacture a custom product in 4 weeks. And we can do all that because we have our own master glass blowers on staff. We have quite a few of these folks, and some of them are 2nd and 3rd generation master glass blowers. So their fathers worked for Bellco and their grandfathers worked for Bellco. So you have to understand the area of New Jersey where the company is located has probably 60% of the industry in that area is glass, because that's where the ultrafine silica sand is located for manufacturing high quality glassware. It's in that southern New Jersey area. We have a lot of competition in that area, but there's also a lot of expertise that we can call on. And Bellco is a family company. It's a privately owned company. It's not public. And so, we value our relationships with our employees extremely highly, and the company always has done.
That's really interesting. And so The story just doesn't tell the amazing speed of order conversion or the speed of your operations, but it highlights mainly the focus on customers that you have. So that is really amazing to know. So talking about Belco again, how do you look at the future of Belco? What are the current opportunities or what are the challenges that you think currently Belco is dealing with?
So that's actually a couple of really good questions. So I would say one of the biggest challenges that we face in the biopharmaceutical market, as an example, is the increased adoption of single-use technologies, which are taking over from glass in some aspects of manufacturing. And there are good reasons for that. I mean, single-use technology is lighter, easier to use, definitely can be scaled beyond 150 liters. I mean, I've worked with companies who manufactured 2 or 3 and 4,000 liter single-use bioreactor bags. We're not going to make a 1,000-liter bioreactor in glass. First of all, it would be so flipping heavy. Secondly, there isn't an autoclave built that would physically take it to sterilize it. So there are limitations. So I see that's one of the challenges. A second challenge that we face, I think, at Belco is that, although the company has been in business for almost 90 years, we went through a period of where we were not well represented in the marketplace. And so the goal now is to build that representation back up to expand the company's reach. We have a solid reputation and we're very well vested in many of the large biotech companies where we've been doing business for the last 20 years. But there are some other biotech companies that Belco has never worked with. So part of our challenge is to introduce the company and our capabilities to those companies and expand our reach and build on the solid foundation we've got, but it's build on that solid foundation with other accounts and other companies, both in the United States. Our second challenge is outside the United States is working with channel partners. In the US, we have a combination of direct sales and channel partners. Everywhere else worldwide, in India, in Europe, in China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, Australia, etc., we are working with channel partners. And those channel partners, by necessity, they have a lot of other companies that they represent, those distributors. So part of our challenge is to create and put forward a really good case as to why our partners should focus on Belco. And that's both commercial, i.e. what the opportunities are, but it's also supporting them with the right information, whether it's literature, webinars, technical reports, application notes, all of that stuff, and also a solid, easy to navigate website. So we have a lot of challenges in front of us, which is both daunting, but also a challenge and a great challenge, and one of the reasons I joined the company. When you look at all that, you'd think some people would go, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work, and I don't think we can get there. I look at it and say it's a lot of opportunity. We need to get there. And then how do we craft that roadmap to get there? So leveraging Belco's capabilities, and particularly, as I think I mentioned earlier, in the cell culture space, one of the things we want to do is develop and expand the product range that we've got that feeds into cell culture, because that's it's a rapidly expanding market. It's an area we already have quite a lot of expertise in from a manufacturing perspective, but also from an application development perspective with myself and some of my colleagues who've joined recently who come from a cell culture background, who have that level of experience. We can build on what the foundation that Bellco already has. And that means expanding both the product portfolio that we can manufacture, but also working with third parties, other companies, to bring in technology and expertise that we don't have, but that complements what we do have. And so we're in that building process right now. So I think the future for Belco is huge. We're also, as I said earlier, I've spent 39 years almost selling single-use technology. Now I'm switching 180 degrees to competing against single-use technology. And so we're also putting a series of positioning papers together for the marketplace on what are the benefits, being very candid and very open, but also very honest with our customers. There are benefits to working in a glass type technology, with glass-based technology. There are also downsides. I mean, the biggest downside everybody's going to tell you is glass breaks. Absolutely it does. If you drop it, it smashes. That's one of the reasons we've developed this safety coating process, is to be able to coat the glass so that if that type of accident happens, the liquid stays within the vessel, but also the glass of the vessel stays intact and doesn't fly around the lab or in the production process and injure people. That's a big step forwards in the glass business. Bellco is not unique in that, but we have a pretty unique coating that is much more robust than other companies out there right now. So that's one aspect, but also, as a lot of more companies are looking at their carbon footprint. The carbon footprint of buying and using single-use technologies is actually reasonably high. Everybody will tell you, and I'll be honest and admit it, hey, the carbon footprint of manufacturing glass is high. The carbon footprint of using glass is very low because, you're washing it, you're autoclaving it, you're not, if you're sterilizing it, that is. Those are relatively straightforward processes that, yes, they use energy and they have a carbon CO2 output, but it's much lower than, for example, incinerating a plastic single-use technology process. So there are trade-offs, and single-use plastic short-term in the first 2 years of your application within a facility or within an application, yes, that has a lower carbon footprint, but over time, and there's been several papers published, notably by several universities in the United Kingdom, that show that glass really starts to come into its own in terms of carbon footprint and cost of operational cost at 3 years, 3 to 3.5 years. So if you're using the product for more than 3 years, you're in a cost saving as well as an energy saving program. You're ticking a lot of the environmental green technology boxes as well. And glass is the ultimate material that can be recycled. Once you've used it, you finish with it, it can be ground down and reused for other applications. You can't do that with plastics. And simply because most plastic single-use assemblies are just that. They're assemblies of many different polymers. And so they all require different recycling. They don't all, you can't put them all for incineration at the same temperature. And disconnecting them, taking the polypropylene connector off the end of a silicone tubing so you can recycle the two separately. If you're using one bag a day, that's probably not a problem. But if you're a Pfizer or a GSK and you're using thousands of these things a day, then that's a non-starter. You can't do that. It doesn't make sense. So glass is the ultimate recycled product.
Okay. Great. It is really interesting to know how Bellco is navigating through the challenges and leveraging the opportunities. And definitely it will, like, the future, as you said, is very promising for Bellco.
I think the future is very promising for all glass manufacturers. And to be honest, I'm not saying, and if any of your listeners think I am, I apologize. What I'm not saying is that glass will replace single use or single use will replace glass. There is a place in the market for both technologies to operate side by side in the same way as single use technologies and stainless steel systems operate at large scale manufacturing side by side. And it's really down to the end user, the manufacturer, the operators, to determine what is the most optimal solution for their process and go with that optimized solution. It's our job as manufacturers to present all the information and the data and present it in a format that allows a decision to be made based on fact.
Right. So, we would love to hear more about your personal story as well. You have a you have a very strong connection with India. Your father has served here during World War II. So can you just walk us through your personal journey?
Absolutely. So going back to when I was a kid again, I mean, back to being a child. My dad was a chemical engineer. That was his training. That was his background. And he started life as a bench chemist when he was 16 years old because my grandfather, couldn't afford to send my dad to college. So my dad didn't do his A-levels at school. He went to work when he was 16. And then World War II interrupted when he was as a bench chemist, and he volunteered for the Air Force because, as he said, my dad's comment was, a shooting war is there. It's already started. And if there was going to be a shooting war, he wanted to be in the service of his choice and not be told where he was going to go. And he'd always fancied the idea of being able to fly. So for no other reason than that, he joined the Air Force. Now, they rejected him twice, even though they needed people. My dad was rejected twice because as an industrial chemist, his job was basically secure because Britain needed chemical systems. They needed oil, they needed refining, they needed fuel, all that kind of stuff. So he was in a protected job. So he quit and then joined the Air Force. So that was the third time. And so he joined the Air Force. They sent him for basic training to Scotland. He was originally navigator. He was originally trained as a navigator, wireless operator. Then he was sent to Canada to train as a pilot. And so he did basic flight training in Canada, out in Alberta, under what was then called the Empire Flight Training School program. EFTS. So he was in Canada for training. He then graduated from there with his wings. He was a certified qualified pilot. He then trained for single-engined aircraft, which meant fighters. And then he volunteered for active service and was sent back to the UK for 3 days and then put on a boat to Sri Lanka. So he joined a squadron called 30 Squadron in Sri Lanka in late 1941, early 1942, and then was posted to India after that when 30 Squadron moved to India. And he served in India as a fighter pilot, flying Hawker Hurricanes and then Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, all the way through to 1946 when the war finished and he came out of the Air Force and went home. But India made a lasting impression on my dad. A lot of the people, the environment, just the food, the whole atmosphere. But what made the biggest impression on him was that people in India were always game for a challenge. And my dad's comment was, the best way to get something done was to tell an engineer in India what you wanted and then tell them it was impossible, because they would have a solution for you within 24 hours. And he had a love affair with the people, the food, the hospitality, which he said was not like anywhere else in the world. Not like anywhere else in the world he'd been. And so as a kid growing up, in the late 50s, through early 60s, and my dad would be telling us stories. My brother and I would tell us stories of some of the stuff he got up to. He never talked about combat. He never talked about actual fighting. And my dad logged nearly 9,000 combat hours in fighters, so a long time. But he never talked about that. But he would talk about the people. He would talk about the aircraft he flew. He'd talk about the places he'd been, the things he'd seen. So he was based in towns like Chennai. He was based at Yelahanka, just outside Bangalore. He was based in Lahore, which, I mean, back then everything was India. But he was based in Lahore for a while. He was Jaipur, and then in Tamil Nadu for a little while as well, as the squadron moved around India. I got to hear all these stories as a kid. I never thought I'd ever be able to get there and see these places. So it was, for me, when I got the opportunity to go to India, it was a little bit, when the first time I went, my dad was still alive. My father passed away in 1992. But the first time I went to India, he was alive. And so I got back and we were talking, and what amazed me was this was late 1980s. So it was over 40 years after he'd been there, and he never went back for some reason. He never went back to India. But I was telling him things, and he was like, oh, yeah, well, if you do this and go that and go down this street and turn left and you're the so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, how do you remember that? How do you know this? And he was talking about one of the railway stations, about the clock in the railway station. And I'm like, how do you remember this after 43, 44 years? So it made a big impression on him. So I was lucky enough to be able to tie in some of my business trips with being able to visit the places that my dad was stationed at. Now, almost all of them, unfortunately, were after my dad had passed away. So I couldn't go back and share those experiences with him. But it did give me a lot of pleasure to be able to do that. And then I was one of my previous companies had a manufacturing facility in Medchal, just northeast of Hyderabad, and in Genome Valley. And the airport and the taxi drive from the hotel we stayed in to the airport in Hyderabad went past the airbase at Secunderabad. And my dad was based at Secunderabad for 11 months. So that was one of their major bases. So I made a comment to one of the guys I was with, Sarab Dashinga, who was one of my, and said, hey, one of these days, I don't know if the base is open. It's an active Indian Air Force base, so you don't think you get on it, but it would be kind of nice to be able to just talk to somebody. Anyway, we never were able to do that, but I was able to communicate with the base commander by email. And of course, the base is off limits because it's an active service base, so you can't go on there as a civilian. But I got some very nice information backwards and forwards, and I was able to supply him with a whole bunch of photographs as well, or copies of photographs that were taken at Secunderabad with my dad and the Indian pilots that he flew with. And later in the war as well, he was also responsible for training Indian pilots in what was then a very fledgling Royal Indian Air Force. And so he left in January 1946 and unfortunately never went back. But I was able to visit some of those places. The one thing I will say, and I have to say this, and I'm not blowing smoke because I don't have to, but the one thing that my dad told me about India was just how gracious a hosts the Indian people are. And I'll be honest and tell you, I didn't really know what he meant until I went there for the first time and experienced Indian hospitality. And all I'm going to say to yourself, Arjun, and the reader and the listeners is, if the rest of the world treated its guests in the way India does, the world would be a much better place. So I've in my life, in my career, which I've been very fortunate, I've been able to travel to so many countries. I mean, China, Vietnam, all around Southeast Asia, South America, Africa, Europe, all over Europe, the North American continent, Mexico, Central and South America, all those places. I have never been made to feel more welcome and more at home than I have when I've been in India. And I mean that sincerely. It's the rest of the world can learn a lot from India. So anyways, so that's my personal thing with India, and say growing up as a kid, with an Air Force father, and my dad came out the Air Force and went back to being a chemical engineer in 1946, but he stayed on the Air Force's active roster until the late 1960s. So he had to retrain and what have you to do that. And he received a payment from the UK government every year. So so basically, if they needed him, they could call him up. It never happened. But that meant as a kid, I grew up around old aircraft. And so that sort of got me interested in aviation history, the history of old aircraft and what have you. So yeah, I've a bunch of bits of stuff hanging around, and I won't show you guys, but it's all up here on the credenza above my desk. I've got bits of bullets and all kinds of stuff and what have you. And I've got all my dad's old stuff in the bedroom. I've got my dad's old shipping trunk that he came back from India with. I've got mosquito nets, hats. I've got in the shed, I've got a piece of metal that's about 2 feet wide, 1.5 feet deep, and has got Japanese characters written on it. It's actually part of a fuselage of a Japanese fighter that was shot down, and very close to Hyderabad. So anyway, so I've got a lot of mementos and stuff, but it's not the same as having your dad. So I grew up with old aircraft, and so it's always been my interest. And so I spent a lot of time volunteering at air museums to help rebuild old airplanes. So, and I've actually had the opportunity to fly in a few, including a B-17 Flying Fortress a few years ago. So I got the opportunity to go fly in an old airplane, and it's both exciting, exhilarating, and scary, because you realize that the folks who flew those in combat were a lot younger than me. I mean, some of these kids were 17, 18, 19 years old. And the only thing between you and an enemy bullet was a piece of aluminium about as thick as a piece of card. That's it. And so, yeah, it was a very sobering experience. So, and then the motorcycle side of it, I have to be honest with you, that was purely by accident. That's not my dad. It's not my mum. And that was purely by accident. I was with a friend of mine in a pub in the UK, and there was a guy there who was trying to get home. He wanted money because he had a motorcycle that wouldn't start, and he was looking to sell it. And I bought this thing, purely on a whim. I'd never ridden a motorcycle before. And I was with a friend of mine. We got it started. We got as far as his house. I dropped him off. I went home. There was a lot wrong with that scenario. Number one, I shouldn't have been in the pub in the first place. I was too young. Number two, I was 14 years old. To have a motorcycle license in the UK, you have to be 17. I wasn't. I didn't have a license. I had no license, no insurance, no helmet, no gloves, and no boots, all of which are mandatory in the UK. I got home, parked the thing on the driveway. My mother came out. My mum was about 4'11", and when she ever did this, you knew you were in trouble. So she did that, and she looked at me, and she said, she said, "You can get that bloody thing out of my house." And she turned around and walked away. I found out later that growing up as a kid herself, one of her friends had been killed in a motorcycle accident, and she hated motorcycles. I didn't know that. She never said anything. So I had this bike, and my dad, being ex-World War II fighter pilot who got shot down twice, and he walked around it, looked at it, and went, "Derek, I don't know what to tell you, but that's a lot of work." So that was when I was 14 years old. So that was 1970. It's now 2025. I still have that bike. It's a very old, it was 1959 Triumph Speed Twin, and I still have it. It's now one of 5 that I have, but that started my passion for motorcycles. So I've got that. I've got a Harley Davidson. I've got a big Yamaha cruiser, big Harley cruiser. I've got a Suzuki 650 single, which I was using to teach my daughter how to ride when she was trying to learn to ride. And I've got a big 1.9 liter American Iron Horse Custom. So, and my wife wants me to sell a bunch of them because I don't, having 5 bikes, you can only ride one at a time. So that's been my kind of passion and my escape, if you like. We live on a farm. My daughter's passion is riding. She rides horses. She trains horses, etc. She what have you. So she looks after the horses. I look after the motorcycles. She said to me once, "Do you want me to teach you how to ride?" And I was like, I thought about it for a second. I went, "No, I'm good. That's your hobby. You stay with it." I said, "I don't think I'll ever be as good as you because my daughter's a very accomplished rider." I said, "I will never be as good as you." I said, "And anyway, I don't want to ever ride something that thinks for itself." I said, "Because I don't care how good a rider you are. If you're on a motorcycle and you come to a junction and you want to go right, you're going to go right. If you're on a horse and you come to a stop and you can go left or right, you may want to go right. If the horse wants to go left, you're going left because you weigh 120, 150 pounds and the horse weighs 1,100 pounds. You're going left." So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about me and my background. I'm married. I just literally last Saturday, as you know, because I told you last week, I celebrated my 45th wedding anniversary. And so, it's been a fun experience. I'm past the age of retirement, but still working because I enjoy it. I work with Bellco. I also do a little bit of consulting for companies on the weekends and evenings. So I do that as well. Yeah, and I work with several consulting agencies on those, but I also work with particularly one cell therapy company who were developing a small scale sterile process for them. That's a lot of fun, and I've been very fortunate, I think, in this business to be somewhat successful, to have the experiences that I've had, to go the places I've been to meet with, to work with all the fantastic people I've been able to work with in this business, and to help other people with some of my knowledge and help train people and mentor some folks. I still do mentor some people. Some colleagues are also good friends who I used to work with at past companies, but we stayed in touch. Yeah. And also one thing about this business, particularly in the biotech industry, it's an industry that has a massive impact on the world and people's lives, but it's actually a relatively small business when you look at the number of people who are in it.
Right.
I mean, if there's that you're not talking of hundreds of millions of people in this business. You're talking of, worldwide, maybe 1 million people, and in the United States, 300,000-400,000 people that impact the lives of hundreds of millions of people. And I think somebody asked me, literally, I was in a lift at a hotel in Atlanta at the beginning of the year, and a gentleman got in the lift and asked me the question, "So, as we were going up to the 20th floor. So what do you do? And I'm like, okay, how do you answer that? I said, I work for a company that designs and builds systems that make drugs that save people's lives. And I think that's, ultimately the best answer you can give. And that is, we're all working to save people's lives. And it hit home to me on a very personal level back in 2012 when my wife was diagnosed with B-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so lymphatic cancer. And the drug that was used to treat her is a drug called rituximab, which is a monoclonal antibody. It's was back then made by Genentech at their facility in Vacaville in California, and it's entirely manufactured in single-use assemblies. So the company I was working for that makes the connection technology, CPC, the drug that saved my wife's life went through our connection technologies to get to its final purified form. I don't think there's anything really drives home what we do better than that type of analogy. And that's not just me. My boss at CPC, his wife was a breast cancer survivor, the application specialist in the UK. His wife was a cancer survivor as well. So there's many people in the industry who have been through it, but it's when it comes home very personally at that level that it really makes an impact.
Mhm.
So in a nutshell, I think, I've been very fortunate.
Yes, definitely. From World War aircraft to motorcycles to horses and saving people's life, your
It's a pretty
journey has
broad
been
background, right?
that's really amazing. And I think that's the secret, or it's the other way around. I don't know if that's the secret for you being so young at heart, or it's the other way around. But it's like,
I think I had a boss who I'm still very good friends with when I worked at Sartorius Shukai. And he always said that your attitude in life comes down to one thing, and that is PMA. And that is having a positive mental attitude. Doesn't matter what you're doing, but be positive about it. Look for the good rather than the bad in things. Look for the upside rather than the downside. And one of my favorite quotes that I use when I'm giving presentations is actually from Winston Churchill. And it's very short. It just says, pessimist sees the obstacle in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every obstacle. So I think I definitely put myself in that second category. Yeah, it's just, it is what it is. I mean, look at the
yeah.
alternative. What's the alternative? Be miserable. No, I don't want to be miserable.
And the amazing part of this is you are very good at transmitting that energy to the people you meet. That also I can just sense from what you're
I hope
talking
so.
about.
I hope so. I mean, it's not something that you can flip a switch on and say, hey, now I'm going to be positive, having been negative
Yes.
for the last hour. You can't do that. It's part of your character, part of your culture, part of your DNA. You either have it or you don't. I think I'm very lucky I have it. And I'll be honest, I'll be very honest and very candid. I inherited that from my mother. My mum was a very positive, optimistic person who saw the good in everybody. And she
Oh,
saw the good in everything until proven otherwise. But she always gave everybody what they call in the UK the benefit of the doubt. You were a good person until you proved to her you were not. And and I think my character, while I am the double of my father, I look like my dad, I definitely have my character from my mum.
okay. So I would like to have a piece of advice to the young listeners who are into sales and leadership. What is uh, one sentence advice or one sentence wisdom that you can share with these audience?
So the one piece of advice, actually, I give two pieces of advice and I'll keep them very short. Number one is when you're in a sales environment, and I was taught this by the gentleman who taught me when I first started this business, and that is when you're talking to a customer, you have two ears and one mouth. In a sales situation, use them in that order. Listen and don't speak. Speak when you have something to say, but listen mostly. because I've seen so many salespeople, particularly new salespeople, get themselves into difficulties by thinking they have to speak all the time, and you don't. Ask questions. Ask open questions that get a customer talking. Don't ask a question that the customer can give you a yes or no answer to. But when you ask a question, listen, because you'll get more you'll learn more about sales from your customer than you ever will on a sales training course. And if you keep your eyes and ears open, you'll learn more about yourself as well. So that's the first bit of advice. Second bit of advice is if you're in sales, spend as much time as you can with other salespeople and learn from them. Listen to what they say, how they say it. And don't be afraid to copy things or use things that you hear from other people that are successful. Because my sales career has been built on listening to other people. I mean, in my career, I've had a lot of people I've worked for and with, and I don't think I've ever been on a sales call with either a colleague or a manager or a vice president, or in several cases, the president of Sartorius North America, and I haven't learned something. But you have to keep your ears and your mind open to be able to learn. So that's the other thing. Don't close anything off. Listen. And don't be afraid to take something that works for somebody else and adapt it to your style. You don't have to be them. You are you. You're an individual. Adapt it to your own style. So that's the two bits of advice. And the third bit of advice is you'll never stop learning. As I say, I have never been in a sales program, never talked to anybody at all, including yourself and the conversations that we've had over the last week or so. And I haven't learned something. Yeah. So always keep your mind open.
Sure. That is really insightful and that is really thoughtful advice.
Well, the other thing I would add on that as well, and just builds on the first two things, is if you're not sure about something, ask for clarification.
Right.
I learned very quickly because of a mistake I made. When I was working for Sartorius in London, I made an assumption that this is what the customer meant, and then found out the hard way that that's not what they meant. They meant something else. I was able to recover it, but it taught me a lesson. And that was never assume you know. If you're not sure, ask the question. And what I found by doing that was customers love it when they're the one teaching you and not you teaching them. And a lot of customers know as much about the technology that you're selling as you do. And experienced customers know a lot more. So it's never a customer salesperson relationship. It should always be looked at truly as a partnership.
Right.
So always listen. And if you're not sure, ask.
That is another good piece of advice. Oh, yes, Derek, your story shows us how manufacturing isn't just about machines and materials. It's about people, vision, willingness to adapt while staying true to your values. It was really great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing not just Belco's journey, but your own life story with us today.
You're very welcome. I hope everybody found it interesting, and apologies if not.
No,
But
no,
it's
definitely.
me. It is me.
Yes, yes, definitely. So there are so many things that people can learn from this podcast to how to be like a person, how to have a positive attitude, how to follow your passion, and so many things. Thank you very much for sharing candidly your journey with us.
You're very welcome.
And we wish Belco a great success
Thank you.
and, and a healthy and long life to you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Arjun. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And to everybody who's listening, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And hope I was able to help in some small way for everybody.
Yeah. And the cause that you're serving is also amazing. You're helping people to recover from their recovering their health and saving lives. So that is a very noble
It's
cause that you're serving.
we all have to have something that gets us out of bed in the morning. And there's no greater feeling of accomplishment than actually knowing that what you're doing is going to have a positive impact on somebody. You may never meet that person, and chances are you will never meet that person. But to be able to know that what you've done today is going to help somebody get better or or stabilize a disease or beat a disease. That's huge. I mean, that's a huge positive feeling that a lot of industries, well, a lot of industries can't ever do, and I cannot imagine myself doing anything other than this. I really can't. Yeah. So anyway.
Yes. So last piece of advice would be find something that makes you wake up from your bed.
Well, I go back to my father, and my father was both my best friend and my mentor for a long, long time. My dad my dad never gave advice. If you asked him for it, he would reply, but he never gave it. But he did once with me when I was 17 years of age, and I was coming up to do my A levels in the UK at high school. And he only said piece of advice he said I can ever give you is find something you truly love doing, and then find somebody to pay you to do it. And if you can't find somebody to pay you to do it, start your own company, because if you love it, other people will love it, and you can make. So I've been fortunate in that I've been able to do both of those things, both work for somebody who paid me to do this, paid me well, but also start my own company or have my own company. I was, say, one of 3 owners in Biotech. And so I've been very fortunate in that respect. But there's one bit of advice I would give everybody is find what your passion is and then follow your passion.
That's a very strong ending remark that we have. So thank you very much once again.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it. I thank you for the opportunity to share some of that story with you and the listeners.